"Stop crying," Alan snapped. "From this day, Yvonne is your mother." Alan's hands shoved Lois hard against the cold iron gate. Her body lurched forward, her suitcase skidding across the gravel. Behind her, her two children, Krista and Benjamin, stood frozen, wide-eyed, their small faces twisted between fear and confusion. The words sliced deeper than his shove. Instead of comfort, Lois was met with cruelty. Instead of the love she had poured into their home, she was thrown aside in disgrace. Alan believed he had broken her spirit, that by poisoning her children against her, by parading his mistress as their mother, he had erased her place forever. What he never imagined was that the same woman he cast out in tears carried a secret power, an inheritance worth $80 million that would one day shatter his pride and strip him bare before the world. Sometimes the woman you try to erase becomes the one whose shadow you cannot escape. Sometimes the quiet ones rise with a thunder that shakes everything you built on lies. This is the story of Lois David, a mother betrayed by the man she trusted most, a wife discarded for another, who rose not just with resilience but with an empire, and today it is being retold by me. Hello family, welcome back. Before we begin, I have a small but heartfelt request. Please subscribe. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Every click helps us share voices that others tried to silence. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what part of Lois's story touched you most. The shove came sudden and sharp. Alan's palm pressed against Lois's back with a force that betrayed years of hidden contempt. She stumbled forward, her knees buckling as she caught herself on the cold iron gate. The clang of metal against bone sent a sting up her arm, but worse than the pain was the sound that followed the heavy thud of her suitcase skidding across the gravel driveway, clothes spilling through the zipper like guts torn open. "Stop crying." Alan's voice was a whip in the evening air, slicing through the stillness. "From this day forward, Yvonne is your mother." Lois turned, her lips trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. She searched his face for some trace of the man she once loved, the man who had promised forever, who had kissed her forehead when their children were born. But the Alan before her wasn't that man anymore. His eyes were hard, his jaw clenched, his hand resting possessively on the shoulder of the woman standing behind him. Yvonne. In her fitted brown dress, Yvonne leaned against the grand double doors of the mansion as though she already owned them. Her lips curled into a smile that was less joy and more victory. It was the smile of a conqueror, the smirk of someone who believed she had won it all. Two small figures hovered in the doorway, torn between shadows and light. Krista clutched Benjamin's hand tightly, her knuckles white. At 11, she understood enough to recognize cruelty, but not enough to defy it. Benjamin, just 8, shifted nervously, his wide eyes darting from his mother's tear-stained face to the stranger who had begun braiding his sister's hair and cooking his favorite meals. "Mama," Krista whispered, her voice small, fragile. "Don't cry, Mama." Lois's heart surged with warmth at her daughter's words, but the moment was ripped away. Alan snapped his head toward Krista, his glare sharp enough to cut. "Enough!" he barked. His grip tightened on Yvonne's hand, raising it high like a prize. "She is your mother now." The words cracked through Lois's chest like a hammer against glass. She gasped, but no sound came out. The humiliation pressed down harder than his shove, harder than the scrape on her arm. To have her children told to disown her, to erase her presence from their young lives, it was more brutal than any wound. A shift of curtains caught Lois's eye. Across the street, behind a window draped in lace, shadows moved. A neighbor's face appeared, pressed close to the glass. Then another. The street was quiet, but not silent whispers carried on the breeze. "Poor woman," a woman murmured, her voice low but laced with pity. "After all she gave him." Another mutter followed, this time tinged with anger. "Shame on him! Who does that to the mother of his kids?" Alan didn't hear them, or maybe he didn't care. He was too busy basking in his cruelty, feeding off Yvonne's approving smile. He stepped closer to Lois, towering over her. "Get used to it," he hissed. "You're nothing here, nothing." Krista flinched. Benjamin whimpered softly, trying to hide it behind his sleeve. Lois's chest ached, not just for herself, but for them, for the confusion and fear in their eyes, for the poison Alan was pouring into their hearts. She wanted to scream, she wanted to beg, she wanted to pull her children into her arms and shield them from everything Alan and Yvonne represented, but she didn't. Her body shook, but her lips remained closed. Because Lois knew something Alan didn't. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was survival. Beneath her calm, beneath the tears drying on her cheeks, she carried a truth Alan couldn't touch. Locked in a lawyer's office, sealed in crisp envelopes, was an inheritance worth $80 million. Land, stocks, trusts, all hers by right. It wasn't just wealth, it was power. It was justice waiting to be delivered. Alan thought he had erased her. Yvonne thought she had replaced her, but both were wrong. Another curtain moved. A porch light flicked on down the street. The audience grew. More whispers drifted through the cool evening air. "She's holding her head high," a man muttered. "That's strength right there." "She'll rise again," another woman said. "Just watch." Alan's sneer deepened, but Lois noticed the unease flicker across Yvonne's face. The mistress's smirk faltered, if only for a second, under the weight of unseen eyes and unspoken judgment. Lois bent slowly, deliberately, and picked up her fallen suitcase. The handle was scratched, her palm raw, but she brushed the gravel away with a steady hand. Straightening her back, she turned to face the man who had vowed to love her until death. She said nothing, and her silence cut deeper than any words. Alan scoffed, mistaking her composure for defeat. He pulled Yvonne closer, placing a mocking kiss on her temple. "Go on," he sneered. "Run along. You're finished." Lois lifted her chin. Her eyes burned, but her spine held firm. She took one step back, then another, the gravel crunching beneath her shoes. The iron gate groaned as it swung closed, sealing Alan and Yvonne inside with their hollow victory. Behind her, the whispers rose again. "Her silence is her weapon," an older man's voice drifted from the shadows. "Just watch." Lois walked into the night, suitcase dragging at her side. Each step was heavy, but her resolve was heavier still. She knew Alan believed he had destroyed her. She knew Yvonne believed she had won. But Lois also knew a truth. Neither of them could imagine that the woman they had cast out would one day return, not with tears, but with thunder. And when that day came, no gate would be strong enough to keep her out. The suitcase wheels rattled unevenly against the cracked pavement as Lois walked away from the estate. Each drag of the bag felt like a drumbeat to the humiliation she had endured. Behind her, the mansion's windows glowed warm, golden light spilling through velvet curtains. Inside, laughter echoed faintly, Alan's deep, self-satisfied chuckle blending with Yvonne's shrill giggle. It was the sound of betrayal. Lois kept walking, but her ears caught another noise. The murmurs of neighbors gathered in the shadows. They had seen everything. They had watched her shoved aside like an unwelcome guest at her own home. "She raised his children," someone whispered. "And that's how he repays her?" A woman clucked her tongue. "May God punish him. No man should turn his own kids against their mother." Their voices were soft, but they wrapped around Lois like a shield. She didn't look at them. Her dignity wouldn't allow her to, but she absorbed every word, every witness, every quiet ally. Across the street, an elderly couple stood on their porch, the woman clutching her husband's arm. "She's stronger than she looks," the man said, his voice steady. "He thinks he's won, but storms don't last forever." Lois's eyes stung, but she blinked away the tears. She would not let Alan see her cry again. At the end of the driveway she paused. Her breath came shallow, her chest tight, but she forced herself to turn one last time. Through the iron bars, she saw Alan pulling Krista and Benjamin closer, his arm draped smugly around Yvonne. The picture was staged. He wanted her to see it. He wanted that image of her children slipping from her hands to burn itself into her memory. And it did. Benjamin turned his head, his small face pressed against his sister's shoulder. Krista looked straight at Lois, her eyes wide with confusion and guilt. For a fleeting second, Lois thought her daughter might run toward her, but Alan's hand tightened on her shoulder and Krista froze. Lois exhaled slowly. She whispered only 3 words under her breath, too soft for Alan to hear, but loud enough for her soul to register. "One day, children." The gate creaked shut, the lock sliding into place. The clang was final, like a gavel striking wood. Lois turned away. The street stretched long and dark, lined with manicured hedges and silent houses. A few porch lights flickered on as curious neighbors stepped out, drawn by the commotion. Some offered sympathetic glances, others shook their heads at the spectacle Alan had made. "She deserves better," a young woman muttered to her companion. "Any fool can see that." Her companion, older, spat into the dirt. "A man like him won't end well. Mark my words." Lois walked past them with her head high. She wouldn't crumble, not here, not in front of strangers. She gripped the suitcase handle tighter, the weight of it grounding her. Inside the mansion, Alan's voice carried faintly through the open window. "She'll be fine," he boasted. "She's nothing without me. Nothing." Yvonne's laughter followed, sharp and mocking. "Nothing? Then why do her eyes still haunt you?" Alan didn't answer right away. Lois didn't need to hear the rest, she already knew. She reached the corner, where the glow of a street lamp bathed the sidewalk in pale gold. There, she finally stopped. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the curb, setting the suitcase beside her. The night air wrapped cool fingers around her shoulders. She let herself breathe. Just breathe. Images swirled, Krista's trembling voice, Benjamin's confused eyes, Alan's sneer, Yvonne's smirk, each cut deeper than the last. But beneath it all, one thought rose steady and unyielding. "They think I am finished." Lois closed her eyes, pressing her hand against her chest, where her heartbeat pounded like a drum. She remembered her grandmother's words, spoken years ago when life seemed unbearably heavy. "Dignity is silent strength. When the world thinks you've broken, stand taller." Lois straightened her spine, lifting her chin into the night air. She whispered again, this time not to her children, but to herself. "They'll see. One day, they'll see." Meanwhile, back at the mansion, the party continued. Alan poured whiskey into crystal glasses, toasting himself like a man who had won a battle. Yvonne perched on the arm of his chair, draping her arm around his shoulders. "You handled her well," she cooed. "She'll never come back." Alan smirked. "She's weak. Always was." But as he said it, he glanced at the locked gate, where Lois's shadow had just disappeared into the dark. For the briefest moment, unease flickered across his face. Yvonne noticed, but she said nothing. She only tightened her hold on him, as if to remind him she was there now. Lois rose from the curb, her resolve solidifying. She wasn't sure where her feet would take her tonight, maybe to a friend, maybe to a hotel, maybe nowhere at all. But she knew this much: she would endure. The whispers of the neighbors, the pity in their eyes, the disgust in their voices, those were not just echoes of gossip. They were proof she wasn't invisible, proof she wasn't erased. Alan could poison her children's minds, parade Yvonne in her place, shove her into the street, but he couldn't erase who she was, and he couldn't erase what was already hers. Sealed away in quiet offices, and signed under the careful hand of her late father's lawyer, her inheritance waited. $80 million, a legacy Alan knew nothing about. And when that truth came to light, it wouldn't just free her, it would crush him. Lois gripped her suitcase handle once more and began walking again, this time with steadier steps. The night stretched ahead like a road she would conquer, no matter how long it took. Behind her, in hushed tones, the neighbors whispered one last time. She held her silence, the old man said again, his voice carrying into the dark. That silence will be the loudest thing he ever hears. And with that, Lois disappeared into the night, carrying not just a suitcase, but a promise to herself, to her children, and to the destiny Alan could never take away. The night swallowed Lois as she left the mansion's iron gates behind, her suitcase rolling unevenly on the cracked pavement. The sound of gravel under her shoes lingered like a drumbeat of finality. She walked into the unknown, but the memory of Alan's sneer, Yvonne's smirk, and her children's confused eyes stayed sharp in her chest. Her steps slowed at the edge of the street. She paused beneath the orange glow of a street lamp, drew in a breath, and closed her eyes. And as she stood there, her mind began to slip backward, drifting into a time when things were different, when laughter and promise had filled her world instead of betrayal and humiliation. Once, Alan had been everything. She remembered the first time she saw him, lean, tall, eyes bright with ambition. He was working at a small accounting firm then, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tie loosened, the kind of man who carried confidence like a second skin. She'd been delivering documents for her grandfather's lawyer when Alan held the door open with a grin so quick and disarming that she felt her cheeks burn. "New around here?" he asked, voice smooth as velvet. Lois nodded shyly, clutching her file against her chest. "Then let me be the first to welcome you," he said. "Name's Alan Johnson, and you are?" "Lois," she answered softly. The grin widened. "Lois, pretty name. Bet it comes with a story." Back then, everything he said felt like a spark, each word lighting up corners of her world she hadn't known were dark. Their courtship unfolded like something out of a novel. Alan brought flowers to her door, daisies at first, then roses when he learned they were her favorite. He slipped handwritten notes under her windshield wipers, notes that read, "Can't stop thinking about you." On rainy afternoons, he would show up with coffee and coax her into long walks beneath an umbrella, their shoulders brushing, their laughter mingling with the sound of raindrops. He listened when she spoke, or at least it felt that way. He asked about her dreams, her childhood with her grandparents, her love of books and music. She mistook his curiosity for tenderness, never realizing that ambition simmered beneath his charm, feeding on her every revelation. When he proposed, it was in front of the fountain at Lincoln Square, where children threw pennies into the water and wished for forever. He knelt, ring in hand, voice low enough that only she could hear. "Lois," he said, his eyes bright with promise, "be mine. Let's build a life together, just you and me, against the world." Her heart soared. She said yes, tears streaming down her cheeks as the crowd around them erupted into applause. At their wedding, he dazzled everyone. Friends spoke of his charisma, of how lucky Lois was to have captured such a man. Her aunts whispered prayers for her happiness. The church bells rang, and she believed she was stepping into the life of her dreams. The photographs from that day told a story of perfection, Alan in his black suit, Lois in ivory lace, her smile wide enough to light the room, but hidden between those smiles were cracks no one could see yet. Friends would later recall, with the clarity of hindsight, the signs they missed. The way Alan never sat still, always tapping his fingers, always glancing around as though searching for something more. He was never satisfied, one friend whispered years later, over coffee with another. Always chasing more. No matter how much he had, it wasn't enough. At the time, though, Lois brushed those thoughts aside. To her, he was a man with ambition, a man who wanted to provide, a man who, despite long hours and tired eyes, always came home to her. Or so she thought. The first cracks appeared subtly, little criticisms wrapped in laughter. "You're too quiet, Lois," he'd say, chuckling as though it were harmless. "Smile more when we're out. People will think you're unhappy." Or, "Why don't you wear something brighter? That dress makes you look like a nun." They were small, at first easy to dismiss as teasing. She laughed along, convincing herself he meant no harm. But the laughter faded, and the comments grew sharper. "You'll never understand business," he snapped one evening when she asked about his new venture. "Stick to the house. That's what you're good at." Even then, her family urged her to stay strong. At Thanksgiving one year, when Alan stepped outside to take a call, Lois's Aunt Miriam leaned close, her hand soft on Lois's arm. "Stay strong, child," she whispered. "You're better than his cruelty. Remember that." Lois smiled weakly, too embarrassed to admit how deeply the words struck. Another aunt, Aunt Clara, echoed the sentiment later that night. "A man with wandering eyes will never stop chasing shadows. But you, Lois, you're the light. Don't let him dim you." Lois tucked those words away, even as Alan's voice grew harsher, his temper shorter. And yet, she clung to the good moments, the bedtime stories he read to Krista when she was little, the way he held Benjamin on his shoulders at the fair, the smiles that made strangers think they were the perfect family. She wanted to believe those moments outweighed the bitterness creeping into their lives. But deep down, she knew. She knew the man who had once held her hand under the rain had begun to drift away, chasing dreams that had no room for her. By the time Krista turned 6, Alan was spending nights away, his excuses flimsy. "Business meeting," he'd say, loosening his tie, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't hers. Lois tucked the children in, whispering prayers into their ears, her heart heavy but her smile steady. She told herself it was a phase, that every marriage had storms, that he would come back to her. But Alan didn't come back, not really. Each step he took away from her, he walked closer to the woman who would one day smirk from the mansion doors while Lois stood outside in tears. The memory dissolved, and Lois found herself again under the street lamp, suitcase by her side, night air pressing cool against her cheeks. Her heart ached with the weight of all those years, the laughter that turned into criticism, the promises that soured into contempt. She drew in another breath and straightened. She had survived the past. She would survive this night too. And as the whisper of her aunts echoed in her memory, "Stay strong, child, you're better than his cruelty," Lois stepped forward into whatever awaited her next. The night wrapped around Lois as she kept moving, her suitcase dragging against the pavement. She let the rhythm of her steps pull her deeper into memory. Faces from the past rose, and faded faces of friends who once toasted her happiness, voices of family who warned her gently, glimpses of Alan before greed overtook his smile. Alan had been restless from the beginning, even when their apartment was new, with second-hand furniture and laughter bouncing off the walls. He spoke as if it were temporary. "This is just the start," he'd say, pacing the small living room with his tie loosened and sleeves rolled. "I'll make partner in 2 years, maybe less. Then we'll get a house, a real one. Big kitchen, garden for the kids, you'll see." Lois would nod, hope softening her eyes. She wanted to believe ambition was love, that his hunger for more was for her and the family they would build. But hunger like Alan's could never be satisfied. Friends noticed. At barbecues, at parties, at weddings, they saw the way his eyes darted to other men's cars, the way his voice hardened when conversations turned to money. "He's never satisfied," one friend muttered years later, shaking his head. "Always chasing more, like nothing's enough." At the time, Lois brushed it off. Love makes excuses. Love blinds. When Krista was born, Alan held her for a moment, just a moment. Then he passed her back to Lois and left to answer a phone call. She tried to forgive him. He was building their future, she told herself. He was under pressure. But nights turned into a blur of Lois rocking the baby while Alan stayed out late. Clients, he explained, opportunities. The pattern didn't break when Benjamin arrived. Instead, Alan grew sharper, his words cutting deeper. "Do you know how much this costs?" he demanded one night, waving a hospital bill in his hand. "I'm the one carrying this family, Lois. Don't look at me like I'm the villain." Lois lowered her eyes, pressing Benjamin against her chest, the baby's soft breath her only comfort. The mansion came later, after Alan charmed investors and dipped into risky deals. It was everything he wanted: sprawling lawns, marble floors, chandeliers glittering above Yvonne's smirks years later. At first, Lois tried to make it a home. She decorated Krista's room in lilac, hung glow-in-the-dark stars on Benjamin's ceiling, planted roses along the walkway. She wanted to root their family in warmth. But Alan was gone more often, consumed by parties and conferences. When he was home, his eyes carried shadows. Deals had soured, debts crept closer, and Lois's attempts at comfort met only irritation. "You don't understand pressure," he snapped one night, pouring himself another drink. "You sit at home with the kids. You have no idea what it takes to keep this life." Her chest tightened at the words, but she swallowed them. What could she say? That she kept the house alive, the children safe, herself intact despite his absence. He wouldn't hear it. And then came Yvonne. She appeared first as a name Lois overheard on late-night phone calls. Alan's voice softened when he said it, his tone low and coaxing. Weeks later, Lois noticed perfume clinging to his suits, a scent too bold to be mistaken. Her suspicions grew, but her proof came the night he didn't bother hiding it anymore. He brought Yvonne to a gala, introducing her as a business partner. Lois stood beside him, smile frozen, humiliation burning her cheeks as whispers spread across the room. "She's younger," someone murmured. "Prettier too." Lois's hands trembled, but she kept her head high. She remembered her aunt's voices like lifelines. "Stay strong, child. You're better than his cruelty." She whispered those words to herself that night, clutching them like armor. From that point, Alan's cruelty sharpened. He grew bolder, flaunting Yvonne in public, leaving Lois to field the children's questions. "Daddy says Miss Yvonne makes him happy," Krista said once, confusion clouding her young face. Lois smiled faintly, hiding her pain. "Your father says many things," she murmured, tucking her daughter into bed. Her friends saw the change. Women who had once admired Alan's charm now shook their heads. "Lois deserves better," they whispered over coffee. "She gave him everything, and he gave her nothing in return." But whispers offered no comfort when Lois stood alone at night, the children asleep, her heart aching. The cruelty peaked the day Alan began introducing Yvonne as the children's second mother. It was the rehearsal for what would one day culminate at the mansion gates. At school events, Yvonne appeared at Alan's side, waving as though she belonged. Teachers smiled politely, but the parents whispered. "That poor wife," one said. "Imagine watching another woman play mother to your own children." "She's enduring it with grace," another added, "stronger than I'd ever be." Lois held her silence, her dignity intact. She couldn't stop Alan's charade, but she refused to let him break her. The memories churned inside her as she walked beneath the street lamps, suitcase rattling at her side. She thought of the girl who had once believed in Alan's promises, the young bride who smiled in ivory lace, the mother who soothed her children alone in a mansion that wasn't really a home. And she thought of the whispers, the neighbors who pitied her, the friends who judged him, the aunts who reminded her of her worth. All those voices wove together now, like threads pulling her forward. Alan believed he had erased her. Yvonne believed she had replaced her. But Lois carried something greater than both, the quiet certainty of who she was. Her late father's will, sealed in a lawyer's office, waited. An inheritance of $80 million that Alan knew nothing about, a truth that would one day turn his smirk into silence, his sneer into shame. As Lois disappeared deeper into the night, the last echoes of community whispers lingered in her memory. "She's stronger than he'll ever understand. She'll rise again, just wait." And with each step forward, Lois carried that prophecy inside her, walking not as a broken woman, but as one on the cusp of reclaiming everything she had lost. Lois's footsteps echoed in the night as she carried her suitcase farther from the mansion, the weight of betrayal pressing on her shoulders. Her children's faces haunted her, Krista's conflicted gaze, Benjamin's uncertain eyes. Their silence at the gate pierced deeper than Alan's shove. She could endure humiliation, but the thought of losing their love was a knife twisting slowly. She stopped under a tree, clutching her suitcase handle. "They're just children," she whispered to herself. "He won't turn them against me. He can't." But Alan could. And he was already trying. Inside the mansion, Alan wasted no time weaving his lies. That same evening, he gathered Krista and Benjamin in the living room. The fire flickered in the hearth, shadows dancing across the walls. Yvonne perched nearby, her painted smile tight with satisfaction. Alan leaned forward, his voice low, his words deliberate. "Your mother doesn't care about us anymore," he told them. "She left. She chose herself over this family. That's the truth." Krista frowned, confusion clouding her young face. "But Mama was crying," she whispered. "She wanted to stay." Alan shook his head, gripping her hand tightly. "Tears don't mean love, Krista. People cry when they're guilty too." Benjamin's lips quivered. "She still loves us," he mumbled. Alan's jaw tightened. He looked at Yvonne, and she stepped in smoothly, her voice syrupy but cold underneath. "Children," Yvonne said, kneeling so her eyes met theirs. "Sometimes people aren't strong enough to stay, but your father is here, I'm here, we'll take care of you. You don't need to worry about her anymore." Benjamin glanced at his sister, uncertainty flickering between them. Alan pulled both children close, his arm heavy across their shoulders. "From now on, you listen to me, and you listen to Yvonne. She's going to help raise you. Your mother, she's gone." The fire popped loudly, like a cruel punctuation mark. The poison didn't work instantly. At first, Krista and Benjamin resisted, clinging to the memory of their mother's voice, the way she tucked them in, the warmth of her lullabies. But Alan was patient. Day after day, he repeated the same venom, dripping bitterness into their ears until confusion blurred into doubt. She's selfish. She abandoned us. She chose her pride over her children. The words became a mantra, a twisted lullaby. Consuela, the cleaner, noticed the change. She saw how Krista grew quiet when Lois's name was mentioned, how Benjamin avoided looking at the family portraits, where Lois still smiled beside them. She saw the way Alan smirked when his children turned their backs on the memory of their mother. One afternoon, while tidying the upstairs hallway, Consuela overheard a conversation between the children and Alan. "Don't cry about her anymore," Alan scolded Benjamin. "She doesn't deserve your tears." Benjamin sniffled, wiping his face with his sleeve. Krista looked down at the floor, silent. Consuela's heart clenched. She whispered under her breath, "Señor Alan, Dios is watching." Later that evening, a young babysitter named Maria arrived to watch the children while Alan and Yvonne dressed for another dinner out. Maria was only 19, but her eyes were sharp and her heart leaned toward compassion. As she tucked Benjamin into bed, she noticed the boy clutching his blanket, tears slipping quietly down his cheeks. "Do you miss your mama?" Maria asked softly. Benjamin nodded. "Papa says she's bad. He says she left us. But I remember her hugs. They were warm. Why would a bad person hug like that?" Maria brushed his hair back gently. "Don't let anyone steal what you know is true, Benjamin. Your mama loves you. Sometimes grown-ups lie when they're angry." He blinked at her, confusion etched in his small face. When Maria stepped back into the hallway, she found Consuela dusting the banister. Their eyes met, and Maria whispered, "He's turning those kids cold against their own mama. One day, they'll regret it." Consuela nodded gravely, her voice low. "The truth always rises, Nina. Children's hearts remember love, even when poisoned." Downstairs, Alan and Yvonne prepared to leave. Alan tightened his tie in the mirror, admiring his reflection. Yvonne adjusted her earrings, smirking. "She's fading from their memories already," Alan said smugly. "Soon they won't even ask about her." Yvonne's laughter tinkled, sharp as glass. "You're clever, Alan. Strip her of her children and she has nothing left." Alan kissed her cheek, pride swelling in his chest. "By the time she tries to crawl back, they won't want her." They left together, the door slamming shut, their laughter trailing into the night. Consuela lingered in the kitchen, wiping counters that were already clean. Her heart ached for Lois, the woman cast out into the dark. She thought of the whispers she'd overheard in the neighborhood, the neighbors who pitied Lois but did nothing to stop Alan's cruelty. "Señora Lois," she murmured softly, "your children are slipping, but not forever. You are their true mother. Nothing changes that." Maria, still standing nearby, lowered her voice. "If only she knew what he's saying to them. It's cruel." Consuela set down her rag, her hands trembling slightly. "One day, Nina, justice will knock on this door, and Señor Alan will answer for every word." Meanwhile, Lois walked the darkened streets, unaware of the venom Alan was feeding her children. Her suitcase rattled over uneven ground, but her mind drifted again to Krista's small hand in hers, Benjamin's giggles when she tickled him under the chin. "They know my love," she whispered to herself. "They must." The night gave no answer, only the hollow sound of her steps echoing against empty sidewalks. The poison worked slowly, like ink bleeding into clear water. Days blurred into weeks, and Alan's words repeated themselves until they echoed in Krista and Benjamin's minds. What had once been certainty that their mother loved them fiercely was now smudged with doubt. On Saturday mornings, when Lois used to bake pancakes and fill the kitchen with the smell of vanilla, the children sat at the table with Yvonne instead. She ordered takeout croissants, arranging them on a tray with forced elegance. "Your mother never cared to feed you like this," she told them, sipping her coffee. "She thought simple food was enough, but I believe you deserve more." Krista bit into the pastry silently, but her eyes lowered to her lap. Benjamin chewed slowly, glancing toward the window as if hoping his real mother might appear. Alan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching. He smirked. "You see how different life is with Yvonne? No more tears, no more drama, just comfort. That's what a family should look like." The children nodded, not because they believed him, but because resistance wore them down. When Lois tried to call, Alan answered first. "She doesn't want to talk to you," he told the children, lowering the receiver so his voice carried. "If she did, she'd be here. She's too busy thinking about herself." On the other end, Lois pleaded, "Please, Alan, let me hear their voices." But he hung up, leaving her words swallowed by silence. When the children asked about the calls, he lied easily. "She never called. She forgot about you." Benjamin's lips trembled, but Krista looked away, her small shoulders stiff. Consuela bore witness to all of it. She polished silver while Alan boasted to guests. She folded laundry while Yvonne whispered poisonous phrases into Krista's ears. She swept the hallways while Benjamin dragged his feet, his spark dimming a little more each day. One evening, as she collected glasses from the living room, she overheard Alan laughing with a guest. "The trick," he said, swirling his drink, "is to cut her out completely. Kids are malleable. Feed them a story long enough and they'll believe it. By the time Lois tries to claw her way back, they'll hate her." The guest chuckled, clinking glasses. "Cold, Alan, very cold." Alan grinned. "Necessary." Consuela's hands tightened around the tray. She wanted to speak, to defend Lois, but she swallowed her words. Her loyalty was silent, her defiance hidden in prayers whispered when no one listened. The children's behavior began to shift. Krista, once eager to draw pictures for her mother, now tucked her crayons away. When Consuela asked about her sketches, the girl shrugged. "Mama doesn't want them. Papa said she threw my last one away." Benjamin, once quick to hug, now pulled back when Lois's name surfaced. "Papa said she doesn't like hugs. He said she only pretended." Consuela crouched before him, her eyes glistening. "Your mama's hugs were real, Nino. Don't forget the warmth you felt. No lie can erase it." Benjamin hesitated, then whispered, "I remember." But when Alan's footsteps echoed in the hall, he straightened quickly, masking the truth. Maria, the babysitter, confided in Consuela one night after the children were asleep. "They're changing," she whispered, worry tugging at her features. "Every day they grow colder. He's turning their love into something brittle." Consuela sighed deeply. "It is poison, Nina, but poison can be purged. Someday they'll open their eyes. For now, we wait. We keep the truth alive in whispers and kindness." Maria bit her lip. "What if it's too late?" Consuela shook her head. "A child's heart remembers love, even buried under lies. It may take time, but the truth always returns." Meanwhile, Alan basked in his illusion of triumph. At dinners, he paraded the children beside Yvonne, introducing her as though she were already their mother. "Yvonne takes such good care of them," he boasted. "They hardly ask about Lois anymore." Guests raised eyebrows but said little. Some whispered afterward, voices thick with judgment. "Turning children against their mother, that's a curse waiting to fall back on him. He's building his house on sand. One storm and it'll collapse." Alan ignored them. He believed himself untouchable. But Lois felt the shift. When she managed to see the children briefly through arranged visits, Alan allowed only when it served his pride, she noticed the distance in their eyes. Krista hugged stiffly. Benjamin lingered behind his sister. Their words were short, their glances quick. "Do you miss me?" Lois asked softly, her voice trembling. Krista looked at the ground. "Papa says you don't care about us." Benjamin bit his lip, eyes watering. "Do you?" Lois's heart shattered. She cupped his face, tears streaming silently. "More than life itself, my loves, don't ever doubt it." But Alan cleared his throat, standing in the doorway with Yvonne at his side. "Time's up," he announced, smugness dripping from his tone. The children stepped back, retreating to their father's side. Lois's hands dropped to her lap, her body shaking with grief. After they left, she sat alone in the quiet room, her chest aching. She remembered her aunt's words, the warnings, the whispered prayers. "Stay strong, child. You're better than his cruelty." She clung to those words now, even as the weight of Alan's manipulation pressed heavier on her. In the mansion, whispers among the staff carried through the halls like a secret current. "He's poisoning their hearts," Maria murmured while folding laundry. "They'll regret it," Consuela replied firmly, her voice a low vow. "Children always regret when love is stolen from them, and when they do, they will return to her." The staff nodded in hushed agreement, solidarity born in silence. One stormy night, while thunder rattled the windows, Benjamin crawled into Krista's bed. "Do you remember Mama's song?" he whispered. Krista's face softened. "Yes." Together, they hummed it, the melody shaky but familiar. For a few precious moments, the poison faded, replaced by the memory of a woman's voice singing them to sleep. Down the hall, Consuela overheard, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. "They still remember," she whispered into the dark. "Gracias a Dios, they still remember." Alan believed he was winning. Yvonne believed she was replacing. But in the quiet corners of children's hearts, Lois's love still lived, waiting for the day it would rise again. And as Consuela polished the silver one final time that night, she whispered a promise meant only for the shadows. "One day, Señor Alan, your lies will crumble, and the children you've turned cold will burn with the truth." The mansion chandeliers glowed that evening, polished to a brilliance that made the marble floors shine like mirrors. The family gathering had been announced weeks earlier, an event Alan insisted upon to show unity in front of relatives who hadn't seen him in years. But beneath the glittering lights and the scent of catered delicacies, the air vibrated with something sharper: expectation, gossip, curiosity. Lois arrived quietly, her dress modest, her hair pinned simply. She carried herself with grace, though her heart thudded heavily. She hadn't wanted to come, but her aunts urged her presence. "Show them you are still the wife," Aunt Miriam had said gently, pressing her hand. "Do not give him the ground." Yet the moment Lois stepped into the room, she felt the eyes, dozens of them, sliding across her with sympathy, pity, even judgment. She held her chin high, refusing to let them see her break. Then Alan entered. He made certain everyone noticed him, striding into the hall with Yvonne at his arm. She wore a crimson gown that glittered with sequins, the neckline daring, her smile bright with triumph. She clung to Alan's arm as if she had already claimed his name, his house, his fortune. Conversations faltered, then resumed in hurried whispers. "Look at him bringing her here," one cousin muttered, leaning closer to her sister. "Shameless." "He wants to humiliate Lois," another whispered, eyes flicking toward the quiet figure standing by the buffet table. "But the real lady is right there." Alan's voice carried over the murmurs. "Everyone, meet Yvonne." He guided her into the center of the room as though she were royalty. "She has been my support through difficult times." Gasps fluttered through the crowd. A few relatives exchanged stunned glances. Others smirked behind their glasses of wine. Lois felt the weight of every word, but she stood still, her hands folded. Her silence spoke more loudly than any outburst could have. Yvonne preened under the attention, her fingers tightening on Alan's sleeve. "It's such an honor to be here," she said sweetly, eyes sweeping the room. Then, with a pointed glance at Lois, she added, "Family is everything, isn't it?" A sharp murmur rippled through the room. "She thinks she's queen," a relative hissed quietly to another, "but everyone knows Lois is the true lady of this house." Lois's aunts, seated near the back, whispered fiercely, "Poor child, she stands there with dignity while he flaunts that woman. God sees, and so does everyone else. His pride will undo him." Nearby, a cousin shook his head. "Alan thinks this makes him powerful. All it makes him is pitiful." Alan raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he declared. "To shame," someone muttered under their breath. Laughter erupted politely, but the undertone was jagged, uneasy. The relatives clapped, though many eyes slid toward Lois, soft with sorrow, respectful of her restraint. Yvonne basked in the moment, leaning close to Alan as though they shared a private joke. She whispered something that made him laugh loudly, the sound echoing across the hall like a slap. Lois lowered her gaze to the floor, her hands trembling slightly, but she did not flinch. Later, as dinner was served, Lois found herself seated at the far end of the long table. Yvonne sat proudly beside Alan in the center, laughing too loudly, flashing her smile at every toast. Relatives whispered down the table, their voices carrying just enough to be heard. "Did you see how she strutted in? She may sit beside him now, but she cannot erase years of loyalty and sacrifice." Lois's silence tonight stronger than anything Alan paraded. Lois lifted her glass to her lips, letting the whispers sink into her heart. They did not erase the sting of humiliation, but they reminded her she was not invisible. People saw, people remembered. When dessert was served, Alan stood once more. His voice boomed with confidence, his arms still curled around Yvonne's waist. "Life gives us challenges," he said, "and life gives us choices. I chose happiness, I chose truth." A sharp intake of breath passed through the crowd. A few clapped uncertainly, others remained still. From the back of the hall, Aunt Clara's whisper carried, "He chose pride, he chose shame, and one day he will choke on both." Lois rose quietly after dinner, excusing herself without fanfare. Heads turned as she walked across the marble floor, her heels tapping rhythmically, each step steady, dignified. Relatives leaned close to one another as she passed. "She is strength itself. She endures humiliation with grace. One day, this house will remember who its true mistress is." Yvonne watched Lois go, her smile faltering for just a second before she smoothed it back into place. Alan, smug, raised his glass again, but the whispers followed Lois out into the night, and as the heavy doors closed behind her, the gathering resumed, but the air was different. Relatives clinked glasses, yes, but their voices swirled with gossip, pity, and quiet fury. She stood taller in silence than he did in arrogance. Everyone saw it. He cannot erase her. Yvonne wears the crown for now, but Lois carries the throne in her heart. The great hall hummed with chatter once Lois's heels faded down the marble steps. Guests clutched their drinks a little tighter, their voices no longer cautious whispers but sharp opinions cloaked in the safety of distance. "She carried herself like a queen," one uncle murmured, shaking his head. Silent, but the whole room felt it. "Meanwhile, Alan parades that woman," another replied, nodding toward Yvonne, who laughed too brightly at a cousin's half-hearted compliment. "He thinks he looks powerful, he only looks desperate." Near the dessert table, two elderly aunts leaned close, their voices laced with indignation. "Did you see Lois's face? Not a tear, not a word. Dignity wrapped around her like armor. And Yvonne, flashing herself like a prize horse, she believes she's won, but everyone here knows better." The women clinked their glasses softly, a toast of quiet solidarity. Across the room, younger cousins gossiped in low tones. "Alan's arrogance will destroy him," one said. "Mark my words, he'll trip over his pride." "Lois has something he'll never understand," another countered. "Patience, and patience wins wars." At the head of the table, Alan basked in the false glow of admiration. He mistook polite applause for genuine support, blind to the whispers rippling just beyond his reach. Yvonne leaned close, her fingers stroking the stem of her glass, whispering sweet words of conquest into his ear. "They envy us," she purred. "Let them talk. You're mine now." Alan chuckled, clinking his glass with hers, but his laughter felt hollow, the sound bouncing against marble walls already heavy with judgment. Outside, on the stone steps, Lois stood for a moment before the carriage arrived to take her away. The night air cooled her flushed skin, the stars distant but steady above her. Behind her, laughter and chatter spilled faintly through the doors, but she did not turn back. Neighbors standing near the gates had seen her departure. They exchanged knowing glances. "She's too good for that circus," one muttered. "Let him flaunt his mistress." The whole town saw Lois walk out with dignity. That's what people will remember. Back inside, the relatives' whispers grew bolder as the evening wore on. "Yvonne thinks she has the crown," one said, watching her swirl across the dance floor in Alan's arms. "But crowns borrowed through shame never sit right." "She'll learn soon enough," came the reply. "Shadows follow a stolen throne." Another aunt shook her head, her pearls clinking softly. "Alan has forgotten who built his life with him. He humiliates her now, but life has a way of balancing scales." Consuela, working discreetly among the servers, caught fragments of these conversations. Each word of sympathy, each whispered defense of Lois, she carried like treasures to hold close. Later, when the household quieted, she would replay them to herself, reminders that Lois was not alone in truth, even if she walked alone in silence. As she cleared glasses from a table, she overheard one guest murmur, It's a tragedy, yes, but it's also a warning. A man who humiliates his wife in public has already lost the respect of everyone watching. Consuela lowered her gaze, hiding the flicker of a smile. Truth was blooming, even here in the shadows of shame. When the gathering ended and guests began to filter out, gossip spilled onto the streets. Carriages rolled away, carrying words like arrows shot into the night. She endured, and he flaunted. Yvonne may wear red silk, but Lois wore silence, and silence was stronger. Neighbors waiting outside for relatives leaned close, trading their impressions. I saw the way people looked at Lois, pity mixed with respect. And Alan? He's become a spectacle. They'll regret siding with him, another said firmly. Mark this night the beginning of his fall. By the time Alan and Yvonne retired upstairs, convinced they had dazzled the family, the mansion's very walls seemed to echo with the truth whispered within them, that Lois had not been erased, that Yvonne's triumph was fragile, and that Alan's arrogance was already unraveling his reputation. Far from the glittering hall, Lois sat in the quiet of her aunt's modest home. She removed her shoes, setting them neatly by the door, and lowered herself onto a simple chair. Her aunts fussed around her, offering tea, laying gentle hands on her shoulders. You held your ground, Aunt Miriam said softly. You let them see your grace. They whispered for you, Aunt Clara added, eyes glinting. We heard them. Relatives know the difference between arrogance and dignity. Lois breathed deeply, the night's humiliation still burning, but the memory of those whispers wrapping her in quiet strength. She had been paraded against, she had been shamed, but she had not been broken. And across the city, those who attended the gathering carried home a story that would ripple through households, retold over dinners and firesides. That night, Alan flaunted his mistress, but Lois stood taller without speaking a word. That woman's silence was louder than his boasting. Yvonne thinks she is queen, but the true lady of the house walked out under the stars. The word spread, soft but steady, planting seeds in the minds of all who heard. The gossip from the family gathering lingered like perfume that refused to fade. Everywhere Alan and Yvonne went, whispers trailed behind them. Neighbors exchanged knowing looks, relatives spoke cautiously but critically, and even among Alan's business partners, the smirk of quiet disapproval appeared when her name was mentioned. Yvonne, however, mistook attention for power. With every glance, she believed her crown sat firmer on her head. One morning, she swept through the grand hallway of the mansion wearing a silk robe, the train dragging against the polished wood. Staff froze as she clicked her heels against the floor, her chin raised like a monarch. This house needs order, she announced loudly, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. Too many useless mouths eating wages. From today forward, things change. Her eyes narrowed at the line of servants assembled nervously by the stairs. You, she pointed to an older cook who had served Lois faithfully for years, are no longer needed. The meals you prepare are plain and uninspired. Alan and I prefer something more refined. The cook's face fell, her lips trembling. But Signora, I have served this family for— Enough, Yvonne snapped, cutting her off. Collect your things. A murmur rippled through the staff. Yvonne's eyes swept over them again, stopping on a gardener, then a housemaid. She dismissed them with a wave of her hand, as if she were swatting away flies. This is my home now, she declared. If you cannot respect that, leave. The staff dispersed slowly, shock etched on their faces. In the servants' quarters, whispers broke out as boxes were packed in haste. She acts like she owns the place, one maid muttered bitterly. But we all know the papers aren't in her name. The house is still Senora Lois's, the cook said firmly, folding her apron with shaking hands. She wears red silk and struts like a queen, but ink on paper decides thrones, not gowns. Another servant spat on the floor. Mark my words, this won't last. The walls themselves know who belongs here. Lois heard of the firings from Consuela, who carried the news with downcast eyes. They met in the corner of her aunt's modest kitchen, far from the mansion's gleaming walls. She's cleaning the house like a vulture, Consuela whispered, lowering her voice even though no one else was near. Good people, loyal people, she cast them out without a thought. She believes she sits on your chair now. Lois pressed a hand to her chest. The thought of faithful staff discarded cut deeply. They were not just employees, but the fabric of her daily life, threads woven through her years as a wife and mother. Consuela leaned closer, her voice trembling. "But the papers still carry your name, Senora. She cannot erase you with her cruelty. Hold on, the truth will come out. You're stronger than both of them." Lois closed her eyes, tears pricking at the corners. Strength had never felt so heavy. Yet Consuela's words stitched a fragile net beneath her, catching her in the fall of despair. Meanwhile, Yvonne reveled in her false reign. She hosted luncheons with Alan at her side, strutting through the rooms as though she were mistress of a kingdom. She gave orders loudly, scolded staff harshly, and posed near the grand staircase for photographs Alan insisted would show the world their happiness. But behind her back, whispers grew louder. "She wears the jewels, but they were bought for another. She fires staff like she signs the checks, but her name is nowhere. Pride comes before the fall, and hers will be steep." Alan ignored the murmurs, feeding on Yvonne's flattery and her fiery ambition. He believed her cruelty made them strong, that replacing Lois's quiet dignity with Yvonne's sharp arrogance would cement his power. He could not see that the very people who once bowed to him now shook their heads when he passed. That night, in her aunt's home, Lois wrote in her journal by lamplight. Her hand trembled, but her words were steady. "They may strip the house of loyal hands, they may parade themselves through my halls, but bricks remember who laid them, and walls remember who walked them first. They cannot rewrite the truth. Not with lies, not with arrogance. My silence is not defeat, it is waiting." She closed the book gently, her hand resting over the cover. Outside, the night pressed close against the windows, but within her chest, a small ember glowed. Back at the mansion, Consuela whispered to the remaining staff as they cleared Yvonne's discarded wine glasses. "She rules loudly, but paper rules quietly, and paper still speaks Lois's name." The others nodded, their eyes wary but hopeful. In silence, they carried the truth, waiting for the day it would roar louder than Yvonne's laughter. The following week, the mansion's rhythm changed. Once familiar faces were gone, their laughter and steady work replaced by silence. The kitchen felt emptier, the garden less alive. Where loyal hands had tended with love, now there was cold efficiency. Yvonne filled the emptiness with her voice. She stormed through rooms giving orders, barking corrections, leaving trails of perfume and discontent. She criticized flower arrangements, dismissed menus, and demanded staff bow to her whims. "This house will shine as I command," she declared one morning, tossing aside a bouquet arranged by a trembling maid. "Alan deserves the best, and I will see he has it." Her words dripped with entitlement, but the eyes watching her glistened with silent contempt. In the laundry room, hushed voices grew bold. "She fires with no authority," one whispered, folding linen with deliberate slowness. "She thinks Alan's power makes it hers," another replied. "But papers matter more than pillows and pearls." A gardener leaned against the doorframe, voice low but firm. "Let her strut. The more she plays queen, the harder she will fall. The true mistress is patient. Everyone knows it." The room buzzed with agreement. They worked in silence, but the air carried the scent of quiet rebellion. Alan, blind to the undercurrent, fueled Yvonne's illusions. He praised her loudly at dinners, calling her his rock, his partner, his future. Guests smiled politely, but when he left the room, their comments turned sharp. "She sits on borrowed time. Even wealth cannot crown arrogance. Lois built this house with her silence. Yvonne cannot erase that." The words floated from dining tables to corridors, whispers that Yvonne could not silence no matter how hard she tried. One afternoon, Lois returned briefly to the gates to collect a few belongings Alan permitted her to take. Consuela slipped away from her chores to meet her in secret. "They think she holds the crown," Consuela whispered urgently, pressing a small bundle into Lois's hands. "But Senora, I hear the staff. They remember you. They say your name in their prayers. Hold on, the truth will outlive their arrogance." Lois held her maid's hands tightly, eyes brimming. "Your loyalty keeps me standing, Consuela. Without it, I would crumble." Consuela's grip tightened. You will not crumble, you are stronger than both of them. Even Alan knows it in the pit of his heart, though he buries it under lies. For a moment, the walls of betrayal lifted, and Lois felt less alone. Meanwhile, Yvonne escalated her performance. She hosted a luncheon on the terrace, inviting relatives Alan hoped to impress. She wore diamonds at her throat and commanded the servers with clipped tones. "Wine for the ladies! Faster! Do not keep them waiting!" Her laughter rang sharp as crystal, but beneath the tablecloths, her guests whispered, "She is drunk on arrogance." Alan lets her play queen, but everyone knows Lois's name is still on the deeds. Let her enjoy the charade, it will crumble soon enough. The murmurs spread like fire through the group. Yvonne smiled brightly, oblivious to the storm building behind polite smiles. That night, after the guests departed, Alan praised her performance. "You dazzled them," he said, pulling her close. "They'll forget Lois ever existed." Yvonne's lips curved into a satisfied grin. They should. She's a ghost now. But across the city, relatives recounted the luncheon over supper, their words cutting through Yvonne's illusions. She thinks she's queen, but arrogance is a fragile throne. Lois's silence tonight thundered louder than Yvonne's laughter. Lois, unaware of each word, sat in her aunt's parlor by candlelight, writing in her journal. Her pen scratched steadily across the page. "They stripped my name from their lips. They cast me into shadows. But whispers still remember me. Every cruelty becomes a seed, and seeds bloom in time." She closed the book, and her breath steady. The humiliation still weighed heavy, but hope, small, fragile hope, pressed through the cracks. Consuela, polishing silver late into the night, whispered to another maid, "Did you see Lois today at the gate? Even with nothing, she carried herself with dignity. That's what frightens them most. Dignity cannot be fired." The maid nodded, lowering her voice. Yvonne shouts orders, but they echo hollow. Senora Lois whispers without words, and it fills the room. By the week's end, the mansion's corridors buzzed with hidden defiance. Staff smiled and bowed, but their whispers carried a different story. "She acts like she owns it. She cannot erase the truth. She may wear silk, but Lois wears silence. And silence is stronger." Yvonne, blind in her arrogance, continued her parade. Alan cheered her on, but the very walls seemed to murmur Lois's name, carrying it through hallways she once walked with quiet grace. And though she sat far away, Lois's presence lingered, stronger than Yvonne could ever command. The journal was Lois's last refuge. In its pages, she poured her sorrow, her memories, and the fragile threads of hope she dared not speak aloud. By candlelight, she wrote steadily each night, pressing the truth into paper that would not betray her. "He humiliates me in front of family, yet I endure. He parades her as queen, yet I remain. One day, truth will rise from silence, and it will roar louder than his lies." Her hand trembled as she wrote, but the words gave her strength. The journal was her shield. But Alan knew. He watched her carry it sometimes from her aunt's house to the carriage, clutched to her chest as if it were treasure. Jealousy and anger burned in him because whatever lived in those pages, he could not control. One stormy evening, Alan arrived unannounced at her aunt's doorstep. His knock rattled the frame like thunder. Lois opened the door cautiously, clutching her shawl. "What do you want, Alan?" she asked quietly. His eyes darted past her, sharp and searching. "That book," he growled. "You think I don't know? Writing your lies about me? Hand it over." Lois's breath caught. She held the journal tighter. "It is mine, my thoughts, my prayers, nothing for you to fear." Alan's hand shot forward, snatching the leather-bound book from her grasp. She cried out, her fingers clawing for it, but he shoved her back with a force that sent her stumbling into a chair. "You humiliate me in silence, don't you?" he spat, flipping the pages carelessly. "Writing poison, turning people against me. You think words will save you? You're nothing without me." Tears blurred Lois's vision as she reached for the journal, but Alan held it high, sneering. Outside, neighbors had paused in the rain, drawn by the shouting. From the street, they could see the struggle through the thin curtains. "How can a man treat his wife like that?" one muttered, fists clenched. "God will judge him," another answered bitterly, shaking her head. The rain fell harder, pattering against cobblestones as the voices of condemnation drifted through the night. Inside, Alan tore a page from the journal and held it up. "This?" he sneered. "Your pathetic little sermons? Words can't feed you. Words can't clothe you. You're weak." He crumpled the page in his fist and let it fall to the floor. Lois trembled, her arms wrapping around herself. "You may destroy the paper," she whispered, her voice breaking, "but you cannot erase the truth in me." Alan laughed cruelly. "Truth? The only truth is that you are forgotten. Even your children," he leaned closer, his voice like venom. "Even they call her mommy now." Her knees buckled, but she did not fall. She stood, chin trembling but high, even as the wound of his words tore through her. The next morning, Lois tried to resume her quiet errands in town. She entered a small shop to purchase thread, her eyes red from weeping, her shawl pulled close. Alan's cruelty echoed in her chest with every step. At the counter, the shopkeeper noticed her trembling hands. He had heard the gossip, seen the shadows in her eyes, and watched Alan parade Yvonne too many times. As he handed her the spool of thread, he leaned forward gently, his voice low and kind. "Don't let them break you, sister," he whispered. "Better days are coming. The proud fall hard, but the patient rise higher." Lois's lips trembled. She pressed the thread to her chest as tears spilled silently down her cheeks. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to weep openly, and the shopkeeper simply nodded, as if to say, "I see you. I believe you." She left the shop slowly, her tears mingling with the rain outside. Neighbors glanced as she passed, some whispering, some shaking their heads at Alan's cruelty. But Lois walked steadily, even with her heart breaking, carrying not only her grief but also the words of kindness given to her. Alan thought ripping the journal would shatter her. Instead, it became a new fire. Every page he tore, every insult he spat, only deepened the resolve Lois kept hidden beneath her silence. Her pain was deep, yes, but her strength was deeper. And though he stormed away, waving the torn book like a trophy, the neighbors who had seen, the shopkeeper who had spoken, and the staff who still whispered all bore witness. They carried the truth in their hearts, even as Alan tried to destroy it with his hands. Word traveled faster than the rain. By evening, neighbors were already recounting what they had seen the night before. Alan tearing Lois's journal, shouting, his shadow flaring in the candlelit window while Lois stood, silent and trembling. On the street corners, women shook their heads as they exchanged bread baskets. "He tore her very soul from her hands," one said bitterly. "God does not sleep," another replied. "The proud always reap what they sow." Men gathered outside the barber shop muttered too. "A man who humiliates his wife in public? He's already lost his dignity." "It's Yvonne that fills his head," another spat. "But the whole town sees him for what he is now." Alan, blind to the storm swelling around him, strutted through the market with Yvonne the next day. He held her hand proudly, parading her like a jewel he had purchased, loud in his laughter, careless with his words. When they passed a stall selling fruit, the vendor gave him only the briefest of nods, his face stony. Alan mistook it for respect. Yvonne preened at the silent stares, thinking they admired her new place. Behind their backs, whispers coiled. He shames his wife, then flaunts his mistress like a trophy. Even his children, he poisons them to call another woman mother. Shame clings to them both, no matter how much silk she wears. Lois, meanwhile, retreated to her aunt's quiet home. Her journal was ruined, but her memory was not. By lamplight, she began writing again on loose sheets of paper borrowed from her aunt's sewing basket. Her words were sharper now, carved with pain but burning with defiance. He believes silence means defeat, but silence can also be a seed. A seed grows roots in secret before breaking the earth. One day, this silence will break stones. Her aunt, watching her write, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Do not let his cruelty define you, child. You are more than his shadow." Lois closed her eyes, breathing slowly. "He thinks he has broken me, but he has only peeled away what I no longer need." In the marketplace days later, Lois tried to carry herself quietly, purchasing thread and flour as though she were invisible, but she was not invisible. Women paused in their errands to nod silently as she passed. A baker placed an extra loaf in her bag with no charge, pressing her hand gently. "Strength, Signora," he whispered. "Better days are coming." Each small act wrapped around her like armor. Meanwhile, Yvonne pushed further into her role. She summoned remaining staff and announced, "From this day forward, I am mistress here. You will answer to me. Anyone who questions it may leave." The maids bowed, but their eyes betrayed contempt. Later, in hushed corners, their murmurs burned like fire. "She thinks her throne is steady, but paper carries another name. She plays queen in daylight, but truth waits in the dark." Alan, emboldened, mocked Lois even to her face. When she came to collect clothing for the children, he met her at the gate. "You see how happy they are with her?" he sneered, pointing to the window where Yvonne waved with a painted smile. "They don't need you anymore. You're nothing but a memory." Lois's lips trembled, but she did not reply. She turned her face toward the crowd gathering nearby. Neighbors, seeing her humiliation, frowned in silent anger. One muttered loud enough for others to hear, "Even animals protect their mates better than this man protects his wife." Lois met the neighbor's gaze, a flicker of strength sparking in her tearful eyes. Without a word, she gathered the bundle of clothes and walked away, her spine straight though her heart ached. That night, she returned to her aunt's kitchen. Consuela visited secretly, carrying a message wrapped in whispers. "The staff are uneasy," she said softly. "They see her strut, but they know whose name is written. They whisper your strength in the halls. Even Humberto at the gates, he stands guard not for them, but for you." Lois closed her hands tightly around the words. "They may strip me of everything visible, but they cannot take loyalty, they cannot take memory, and one day both will speak louder than their arrogance." In the taverns, in shops, and in homes, the story spread. They said he tore her book to pieces. They said she did not break. They said she walked away with her head high. And in every retelling, Alan grew smaller, his arrogance shrinking, while Lois's silent endurance swelled larger in the eyes of the people. The breaking point had come, not for Lois though her heart was torn, but for Alan, whose cruelty had begun to crack the very foundation beneath his feet. He could not see it yet, but the town had turned. And while he and Yvonne paraded in borrowed splendor, Lois's silence was no longer just endurance. It was prophecy. The air around the mansion's gates carried a heavy stillness, as if even the breeze held its breath. Lois had come quietly, a bundle of clothes tucked beneath her arm, hoping only to see her children for a fleeting moment. She did not expect the stage Alan had set. He stood tall by the wrought iron gates, Yvonne by his side, painted smile glittering like glass, and there just behind them were Krista and Benjamin. Their small hands clung to each other, confusion clouding their young faces. "Say it," Alan commanded, his voice loud enough to carry across the street. "Show her who your real mother is now." Krista looked down, her lips pressed tight. Benjamin shifted nervously, eyes darting between his father and his mother. "Call her Mom," Alan barked again, pointing at Yvonne with a cruel smile. "Do it!" Lois's breath hitched, her fingers clenched the bundle so tightly that the fabric wrinkled under her nails. Her children's eyes met hers briefly, full of pain, full of fear, and her heart shattered all over again. The neighbors began to gather. Doors opened, footsteps shuffled. Men and women drifted to the street, drawn by the cruelty unfolding in the open. They whispered among themselves, voices low but laced with outrage. "This is too much," one woman muttered, clutching her shawl against her chest. "The devil himself couldn't be this cruel," another hissed, shaking her head in disbelief. Children tugged at their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed, sensing the wrongness even if they could not name it. Alan smirked at the gathering crowd, mistaking silence for approval. "See?" he taunted, his voice rising. "Even they know the truth. Lois is nothing. Yvonne is their mother now." But the murmurs did not echo his claim. Instead, they thickened, carrying sharper edges. "She bore those children in pain," someone whispered. "How dare he? Even animals protect the one who birthed their young," another answered. Lois did not shout. She did not cry. She stood still, her shoulders trembling but her chin lifted. Her silence was a cloak, hiding her grief, wrapping her in dignity. She refused to surrender. The children hesitated, trapped in their father's command and their mother's gaze. Yvonne leaned down, her voice sickly sweet. "Come now, little ones, say it, Mommy." Krista's lips parted, but no sound came. Benjamin pressed his face into her shoulder, refusing to look up. Alan's hand shot out, gripping Krista's arm too tightly. "Say it," he thundered. That was when an old man stepped forward from the crowd. His voice was gravel, roughened by years, but it carried across the street with startling clarity. "Her silence is her weapon," he muttered, just loud enough for all to hear. His eyes fixed on Lois, and he nodded slowly. "Just watch." The murmurs hushed for a moment, then swelled again, stronger, carrying his words like fire through dry grass. "Her silence is her weapon. Yes, she does not need to scream. Truth stands with her." Alan froze for a heartbeat, realizing the crowd was not on his side. His smirk faltered, but pride stiffened his spine. He yanked Krista forward again, forcing her closer to Yvonne. "Say it," he barked one last time. Krista's eyes filled with tears. She opened her mouth, but instead of speaking, she turned her head sharply toward Lois. In that small defiance, in that desperate glance, Lois felt a surge of strength she had nearly forgotten. The neighbors caught it too. They whispered more fiercely now, voices turning into a hum of quiet rebellion. "She looks at her mother, not the pretender. The child knows the truth. They all do." Alan's face darkened. He sensed the tide slipping, though he still believed he could force his will on everyone present. But the neighbors were no longer silent spectators. They had seen too much. And Lois, though wordless, was no longer a victim. Her silence rang louder than Alan's commands, her presence heavier than Yvonne's painted smile. The air around the gate grew heavier, charged with something Alan could not control. The crowd pressed closer, no longer hiding their murmurs. Every whisper carried condemnation. "Shame on him. Those poor children. He's lost all sense of decency." Alan's jaw clenched. He tightened his grip on Krista, but when she whimpered, the sound sliced through the silence. Several neighbors stepped forward instinctively, their faces hard. "You're hurting her," one woman said sharply, her voice louder than the rest. Alan turned on her, face red. "Stay out of this. This is my family. My children will do as I say." But his words no longer had weight. Yvonne bent low again, voice dripping with false sweetness. "Say it, darlings, Mommy. It's simple." Benjamin buried his face deeper into Krista's shoulder, sobbing softly. Krista shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No," she whispered at last, the word trembling but clear. The crowd gasped. Some clapped hands over their mouths. Others nodded firmly, their hearts swelling with sympathy for the children and admiration for Lois, who had not uttered a word. Alan's face twisted in rage. "Ungrateful little brats," he roared, pushing them toward Yvonne. But the children resisted, clutching each other, refusing to speak the word he demanded. Lois stood still, her hands trembling as she gripped the bundle of clothes tighter. Her heart broke seeing her children forced like pawns, but the strength in Krista's refusal lit a fire in her chest. The old man who had spoken earlier raised his voice again, louder this time. "Do you see? Even the little ones know the truth. Blood cannot be erased. A mother's bond cannot be stolen." The crowd murmured louder, many nodding in agreement. "That girl defies her father for the love of her mother. The boy hides from the impostor's touch. That tells us everything." Alan's arrogance cracked. He realized too late the neighbors were not his audience of approval but his jury. His face flushed with humiliation, but pride made him double down. "You think her silence makes her strong?" he shouted at the crowd. "She's nothing. She's weak, broken, cast out. Yvonne is the woman who stands with me now. She is their mother because I say so." But the words rang hollow, bouncing uselessly against the iron gates. Lois finally lifted her head higher. She still did not speak, but she did not need to. Her eyes met Krista's tear-filled gaze, then Benjamin's. With only that look, she steadied them, gave them courage. The children clung tighter together, turning their backs on Yvonne, refusing to move. The crowd reacted instantly. "Look, they choose her. The children know who their true mother is. No command can sever blood." Yvonne's painted smile faltered. She looked at Alan desperately, but his fury had no answer. The more he demanded, the stronger the children resisted, and the louder the neighbors condemned him. Finally, the old man stepped closer, his voice sharp as a blade. "Enough, Alan. We have watched your cruelty too long. You shame yourself, your children, and every man who ever took a vow before God. Her silence has already spoken louder than your shouts." Alan's hand dropped from Krista's arm. He looked around, realizing every pair of eyes in the crowd burned with judgment. No one was on his side. Yvonne shrank behind him, sensing the tide had turned against them both. The children slipped from his grasp and ran toward Lois. She dropped the bundle and opened her arms, gathering them close. Tears streamed down her face as she pressed them against her heart, whispering silently into their hair, though her lips never moved. "I am still your mother, always." The crowd sighed with relief, some even clapping softly. There it is. Justice, if only for a moment. She held her ground. She did not need to shout. Alan tried to salvage his pride, straightening his shoulders. "This isn't over," he growled, pointing at Lois. "You think this means something? You'll see. You'll all see." But the threat was empty. The crowd had already judged him, and the verdict was clear. He turned away in fury, dragging Yvonne with him, their steps echoing in bitter defeat. Lois held her children tighter as the neighbors slowly dispersed, their whispers trailing like prayers in the night. "She is stronger than we knew." Her silence was never weakness. It was armor. One day she will rise and he will fall. Later that night, Lois sat with her children safe beside her. She kissed their foreheads, tucking them close, and whispered softly for the first time in days, "I will not let them steal you from me. No matter what they try, you will always be mine." The children clung to her, nodding through tears, and for the first time in weeks, Lois felt her silence break not in weakness, but in strength. The tension at the mansion gates had barely settled when the grind of carriage wheels echoed down the street. Neighbors, already stirred from the confrontation, turned their heads toward the glow of lanterns. The carriage was dark green, polished, dignified. From it stepped Daniel Ellison, the lawyer whose name carried the weight of law and legacy. He cut a striking figure, tall and steady, a leather folio tucked under his arm. The murmurs rose instantly. "It's the lawyer. Why is he here? What could this mean?" Alan stiffened. His jaw worked, but no words came. Yvonne, pale beneath her painted face, clutched his arm tightly. Daniel moved with calm authority, his eyes sweeping over the gathered crowd, over Lois clutching her children, over Alan whose face had drained of color. When he spoke, his voice carried like a bell. "I come with the truth," he announced, lifting the folio. The last will and testament of Franklin D. Ellison, Lois's late uncle, and with it, the rightful ownership of this estate. The crowd gasped as one. A woman pressed her hands together. A man shouted, "Look at God." Another added, "Justice for Lois at last." Alan staggered a step forward. "This is nonsense. Lies. You can't just—" Daniel cut him off, opening the folio with deliberate care. "It is written, signed, and sealed. Franklin Ellison, of sound mind, bequeathed to his niece, Lois David, sole ownership of this property and an inheritance totaling $80 million. The law recognizes her. This estate is hers, not yours." The words dropped like thunder. The crowd erupted, voices rising in disbelief and joy. 80 million. She's the heir. Glory be, truth has spoken. Alan's face purpled. "No, this can't. She has nothing." But Daniel only raised his voice, calm and unshakable. "She has everything. You, Alan Johnson, have nothing here. You are a trespasser." The children's little bodies stiffened at the word trespasser. They turned toward their father, confusion in their eyes, then toward Lois, whose tears shone in the lantern light. She opened her arms silently, trembling with both grief and joy. Krista moved first, tearing free from Alan's grip. She sprinted across the dirt and into Lois's embrace. Benjamin followed, breaking Alan's hold with surprising strength for his small frame. The crowd gasped, then cheered as Lois gathered them close, sobbing openly at last. "They've chosen," someone cried. "Blood runs deeper than lies," another shouted. "See? truth always wins. Alan lunged forward, face twisted in rage. "Get back here," he shouted at the children. "I am your father, you obey me." But his words carried no weight now. The neighbors surged forward, blocking his path. Their eyes blazed with the judgment he had tried so long to avoid. "You'll never recover from this disgrace," one man muttered, loud enough for all to hear. "That woman bore your children, and you spit on her. Now the truth has found you. Justice for Lois at last." Alan's body sagged, his arrogance drained. Yvonne's hand slipped from his arm as whispers curled through the night. She thought she was queen, but she was nothing more than a shadow. Her silence won, not their shouting. Daniel closed the folio with finality. His voice, cool and steady, sealed Alan's fate. "The law has spoken. The inheritance is hers. The estate is hers, and her silence has conquered your cruelty." The crowd roared with cheers, their joy carrying into the night. Lois, cradling her children, stood taller than ever before. For the first time she smiled, not in triumph alone, but in vindication. Alan's chest heaved as though he had been struck. His pride, once a shield, now lay shattered before the very people whose respect he craved. He turned to Yvonne for strength, but she had already stepped back, her face pale beneath her rouge, her painted smile gone. The neighbors did not let the silence linger. Their voices rose like a chorus, harsh and unyielding. This man thought he could erase a mother. He paraded shame in front of his own children. And now the truth has buried him. Alan snarled, his eyes wild. "You fools! She can't manage this estate. She's weak. She's nothing without me." Daniel's voice cut across the night like steel on stone. "Careful, Alan. Every word you speak digs your hole deeper. The law is clear. The estate, the land, the wealth, all belong to Lois. You have no claim." The crowd roared again, some clapping, others shaking their heads with grim satisfaction. Justice has come knocking. Look at God's timing. Her silence was stronger than his shouting all along. Lois, still clutching Krista and Benjamin, slowly stepped forward. The lantern light caught her face, streaked with tears but steady now, resolute. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied as she spoke to the crowd. "I never needed to fight him with anger. My silence was my strength. And today, the truth has spoken for me. My children are mine. This home is mine, and no one can take that away again." The crowd erupted, some raising their hands in praise, others nodding fiercely. "She has spoken. The true lady of the house. Justice at last." Alan staggered back as though struck, his face drained of all color. Yvonne shrank behind him, her once bold posture crumbling under the weight of so many condemning eyes. Desperate, Alan tried one last bluff. He raised his voice, aiming for authority he no longer possessed. "I built this life. I gave her everything. Without me, she would still be nothing." The old man from before, his eyes sharp and unwavering, stepped forward once more. His voice was calm but thunderous in its weight. "You gave her nothing. You only tried to strip away what was hers. And yet she stands taller than you now. You are the one who has nothing, Alan, not her." The crowd echoed his words like scripture. "Nothing, he has nothing. She was the heir all along. Her silence has defeated him." Alan's chest deflated, his bluster faded into pitiful mutters. Yvonne, realizing the tide had fully turned, slipped her arm away from his and lowered her eyes to the dirt. The neighbors began to cheer Lois by name, some clapping their hands, others murmuring blessings under their breath. "Lois, hold your head high. You carried your pain with dignity. Now your crown has been revealed." Lois hugged her children tighter, whispering softly into their hair, "We are free now." Krista and Benjamin clung to her, their tears soaking into her dress. Daniel stepped closer, his voice firm but respectful. "Mrs. Lois David, the law not only affirms your inheritance but also your full authority over this estate. From this moment, no order of Allen's holds power here. Every servant, every acre, every key belongs to you." The crowd erupted again, some shouting hallelujahs, others chanting her name. Alan stumbled, his dignity collapsing entirely. "No, this isn't." But no one listened anymore. He was a shadow of the man who had strutted proudly only days ago. Yvonne pulled her shawl tighter, her eyes darting nervously. The whispers around her grew sharper. She thought she had won. Now she will slink away like smoke. A pretender never sits long on a stolen throne. Lois lifted her chin, her silence at last broken with words that carried the weight of her suffering and her victory. You tried to strip me of everything, my children, my dignity, my place, but what God ordains, no man can erase. I remained silent because truth does not need noise, and now the truth stands. The crowd answered with a cheer so loud it drowned even the rolling thunder in the distance. Some clapped, others wept openly. Justice for Lois. Truth always wins. She is the true mistress of the house. Alan turned away at last, shoulders hunched, dragging his shame behind him like a broken cloak. Yvonne trailed after, her painted confidence smeared away. The crowd did not follow, they only turned back to Lois, their faces lit with respect and awe. Daniel closed the folio and bowed his head to her. It is done. The estate is yours, by law and by right. May your reign be one of peace. Lois nodded, her voice soft but clear. It will be for me, for my children, and for those who stood with me in silence. The neighbors dispersed slowly, still murmuring, their voices carrying through the night like a hymn. Truth always wins. She carried silence like a crown. That man will never recover from this disgrace. And in the center of it all, Lois stood with her children pressed against her, her crown invisible but undeniable, her silence transformed into the loudest victory of all. The storm had passed, but the echoes of it lingered in every whisper, every lantern glow, every watchful eye outside the estate. Alan stood at the gates, the same man who had strutted with arrogance, now bent, his face pale, his lips trembling, his voice cracked as he stumbled forward. "Lois, please," he whispered, the word torn from a broken pride. I made mistakes. I was blinded. Forgive me. Take me back. I can change." But the crowd that had witnessed his cruelty only days earlier now erupted in disbelief. "Forgive you?" someone scoffed. "After all you did to her?" another hissed. "You made your children cry. You paraded another woman in their mother's place. Now you beg?" Alan's shoulders sagged further. The weight of 100 eyes was heavier than any chains. He tried again, this time louder, desperate to drown out their judgment. "I built this. I can't live without it, without you, Lois. You can't turn your back on me." Lois stood tall in the glow of the lanterns, Krista and Benjamin at her side. Her silence was not the silence of pain anymore. It was the silence of finality, of dignity. She did not move toward him, nor did she soften at his pleas. She only wrapped her arms tighter around her children. And in that stillness, the crowd answered for her. She held her peace, and look at her now. Never underestimate a quiet woman. He lost not just a wife, but his pride. Alan dropped lower, to his knees in the mud, his fine clothes stained, his voice broke entirely, pleading like a child. "Please, Lois, please." But she did not speak, and her silence, louder than any words, sealed his disgrace. Behind him, Yvonne stepped back from the circle of lantern light. Her face was stiff with terror. Whispers chased her like shadows. "There she goes. The pretender." She thought she won, but she lost everything. Yvonne turned and fled down the road, her figure shrinking into the darkness, abandoned by the very crowd she once tried to charm. Not a soul followed her. The community's voices swelled into a chorus, their final judgment echoing like scripture. Alan lost not just a wife but his pride. Evan lost everything she schemed for. Lois won without raising her voice. Silence was her sword, truth her crown. Lois bowed her head for a moment, tears glistening as her children leaned into her. Then she lifted her chin once more, standing taller than she ever had. The crowd did not simply see a wronged woman anymore. They saw a matriarch, a symbol, a quiet queen. Alan remained on his knees, his hands shaking, his voice reduced to whimpers. The same man who once shouted orders and demanded obedience now looked small, almost unrecognizable. He tried to reach for Krista's hand, but she shrank back, burying her face against Lois's side. Benjamin pressed closer too, clutching his mother's dress as though to shield her from him. The crowd murmured louder, disgust dripping from every word. "Look at him now, crawling. He thought money made him a man, but dignity makes a man." Even his own children know where their home is. Alan's pleas fell into the mud like broken glass. No one bent to pick them up. No one pitied him. His neighbors, his community, the very people he once strutted before, had turned their backs on him completely. Yvonne's shadow had long vanished down the road. Her name was already being spit like poison in the crowd. She's finished. Gone like smoke. A throne built on lies crumbles fast. Daniel Ellison stepped forward, the folio still under his arm, his voice calm yet commanding. "It is finished, Mrs. Lois David is the rightful heir, the mistress of this estate, and the guardian of its future. From this night on, every servant answers only to her. Every key belongs to her. The law recognizes her alone." The neighbors cheered, some raising their hands skyward. "Glory be," one woman cried. Another man shouted, "Justice at last." Lois's tears shone under the lanterns, but they were no longer tears of grief, they were tears of triumph. She bent and kissed the crowns of her children's heads. "We are safe now," she whispered, her voice trembling with both relief and strength. "We are free." The old man from before, the one who had spoken prophecy at the gates, lifted his cane and declared, "Remember this night, never underestimate a quiet woman." She held her peace, and truth crowned her louder than any noise ever could. The crowd thundered their agreement. She held her peace, and look at her now. Alan lost not just a wife, but his pride. Yvonne lost everything she schemed for. The words rolled through the night like a final hymn, sealing the story forever in the mouths of the community. If her triumph moved you tonight, tap that like button so more hearts can rise with ours. And don't leave without subscribing, because here, we tell the stories of the underestimated who turned their silence into crowns. And your story doesn't end here right now on your screen. There are 2 powerful stories waiting for you. Click the one that calls to you next, and keep walking with us down this road of justice and redemption.